in this video, I'm going to be talking about ritual crime, specifically organised physical, mental and sexual abuse of children. But what is ritual crime? Let's break it down. The word ritual denotes an act of religious or solemn ceremonies consisting of actions performed according to a prescribed order. This is usually based on spiritual purposes that include worshipping a god or gods, a deity, or generally a higher mystical being. Now, when it is criminal, it means it's illegal. The implications of this are much worse than normal crimes, as it will involve activities such as animal sacrifice, pedophilic ceremonies, and torture, all of which I will be going over in detail later on. Now, this connects to the sexual abuse of children due to institutions abusing their power, such as some religious institutions, cult groups, and fraternal-like organizations, specifically Christian institutions, Satanist cults, and Freemasonry fraternities, in which these groups generally perpetuate a Manichaean worldview and large ideologies which constitute of male domination. Manichaean stems from a major religion founded in the 3rd century AD, which elaborates on the dichotomy between good and evil, the spiritual light and the material darkness, in which many survivors of ritual abuse have struggled with during their time as a victim. Ritual crime and ritual abuse gained popularity during the 1960s to 1980s with the rise of new religious movements that ended in travesty, such as the Jonestown mass suicide in 1978. This created the ideal environment for media, sociologists, politicians, and criminologists to look into and invest in researching the occult. It became a major topic of discussion due to how shocking and, quite frankly, how bizarre the scenarios are. Why did this happen? Well, due to the rise of secularization, society also became increasingly individualized, which created the breeding ground for uncertainty. Thus, people searched for new ways to connect with each other spiritually and in a modernized environment. What we do know is that it is difficult to differentiate between legitimate religious and spiritual organizations to illegitimate ones, as trusted institutions are also guilty of committing acts of ritual abuse. The individual ceremonies in which abuse takes place varies from case to case, but can generally fall under the description by Lafontaine in 1993. In an article called Defining Organized Sexual Abuse, Lafontaine described the organized abuse of children as any circumstance in which one or more minors are sexually abused by two or more adults acting in concert, where at least one adult is not residing in the same household as the child and is not a member of the same family. An example of a famous instance of ritual abuse is related to the murder of Sister Catherine Sesnick in Baltimore, Maryland. Allegedly, she was killed by Father Joseph Maskell. He was a counselor and chaplain at Archbishop Q High School from 1967 to 1975. She was a teacher at this all-girls high school. Uncovering her murder also brought to light the raping of multiple underage girls who attended the school. Many years after the presumed cold case, some of the victims came to light to share the stories of their rape and how they believed that it was related to Sister Catherine's murder. These stories take place predominantly in Maskell's office, where a majority of the abuse happened, such as raping the girls to repent for their sins, as well as getting penetrated vaginally by a loaded gun, as well as having another adult, who was also part of the Baltimore church, to rape the girls too. It also happened in subtle ways, such as going to the confession booth and hearing the priest masturbating. The worst part is that in most cases of ritual abuse, especially those involving sexual abuse of children, the perpetrators don't suffer any consequences. You must be wondering how they got away with something so outrageous and inhumane. I think this model of ritual abuse torture best explains the tools and what I have concluded on the motives behind ritual abuse, which are based on the following: 1. Patriarchy and misogyny, 2. Power and control, 3. Fear and survival, 4. Wealth and economy, and 5. Integration and cleansing. These do not all simultaneously exist per case of ritual abuse torture, as every case varies, but most of these motives are applicable. According to the Sarson and McDonald's model of ritual abuse torture, it is due to several factors. In their case study, one of the survivors said it was like living within 3 realities. It is represented in the image, as you can see. The innermost circle is representative of the ideologies that perpetuated onto the victims. The second is the beliefs and behaviours that they must follow within the group. And the outer circle represents society. Each uniquely contribute to the ritual abuse torture happening today and the re-victimization that they face. This study is independent from the Archbishop Q High School case, but creates a framework that fits into most instances of ritual abuse. The people involved in ritual abuse, either abuser or victim, revolve around co-culture as their main ideologies drastically differ from the majority of society. They understood what was clearly accepted in the outer society compared to what was accepted within the occult groups. This means that they would go about their day and not be suspected of committing such grotesque and violent acts. They go undetected as they take over roles that are entrusted to take care of children, such as pastors, caregivers, family members, and even doctors. The victims of ritual abuse torture reported are usually women. Not to say that men and boys are not the victims of this too, but I will be focusing more on the gendered roles of the torture scenarios, which show that men are usually the oppressor or abuser, and women are usually the victims of this abuse. Abusers take on the role of the totalitarian in these ritually abusive organizations. Some abusers even have the fundamental belief that they are equal to God in power and therefore have the right to control and violate the victims. This works for them as it gives them the authority to ensure silence and secrecy whilst facilitating paedophilic entertainment for the ritual ceremony. As they hold all the power, the victims of this just accept this as normal behaviour, such as respecting your elders is normal in outer society. The abusive cycle is reproduced within the groups through gender roles, socializing girls to be the perfect victim by being taught how to be a woman and justifying her rape, whilst boys are taught to be men by being socialized into the role of the oppressor, justifying the abusive actions. A pattern that pertains to many of these ritually abusive organizations is how the abusers force the underage victims, often by their family members, to abuse another child, such as in the depiction shown that was illustrated by a survivor. The survivor reported that herself and another girl at the ages of 8 and 6 were being serially molested by both male and female members of the organization, and the squiggle in the middle between the two girls was blood. This clearly establishes a hierarchy where the child has to follow the orders and rituals organized by the adult leaders of the groups. This also indoctrinates the children into believing that being abused and abusing others is acceptable and normal behavior. In Michael Salter's article, The Role of Ritual in the Organized Abuse of Children, he researches how ritual aspects of the ceremonies indoctrinates the children into believing that the abuse is normal, reaffirming the ideology of inflicting harm with intent, thus reproducing the cycle of abuse that inevitably becomes intergenerational. This involves many forms of abuse and torture, such as physical abuse, verbal abuse, watching and being forced to inflict abuse, and partaking in pedophilic ceremonies. This also includes forms of physical torture, such as being forced to eat their own, an animal's, or another human's waste, as well as psychological torture, like being told that they have been chosen to succumb to this torture and it is their right. Moral ambiguity plays a great role in this, as the children are indoctrinated into believing that these torturous acts are just part of their daily life, when in reality they're being heavily abused, but because of their young age, they don't have the tools to understand that they're a victim. Some abusers even gain profit from this by being involved in these ritual organizations, as some of them have close links to sexual trafficking, especially in the production of child pornography. This will be the most depressing statistic of all time. However, 90% of child pornography is produced by industrialized countries such as Canada, the UK, and the United States. Some of these baby victims even have the umbilical cord still attached, and the pedophilic rape is committed onto these innocent children by family members. You must be wondering what gets done about these acts of torture. The reality is, not much. Most institutions invalidate victims' accounts of abuse due to psychological factors such as false memories or because the accounts seem too bizarre to be true. And abusers are protected due to the power they hold over their victims, the anonymity between the members, and even close relations to people on the police force. For example, going back to the Joseph Maskell case, he got away with raping underage girls and potentially the murder of Catherine Sesnick because of his well-respected status as chaplain and due to his brother being part of the police force. How can we change this? As a society, we need to change our procedures to not be part of the re-victimization process. This means listening to the victims' accounts of abuse, providing them with the appropriate mental and physical care that they need, as well as prosecuting the abusers. We can do this by changing our approach to the organized ritual abuse, and instead of brushing it off as false memories, we can teach ways in which this can be stopped, such as educating people of the signs of ritual abuse and how to intervene without putting the victims in even more danger. Another thing that could help would be to implement laws that specifically tackle ritual abuse torture, as there are currently none in Canada, the UK, and the United States that acknowledge torture as a serious form of abuse outside of the military. All allegations would be going under current laws of sexual and physical assault. Acknowledging the difference would give validation to the victims as well as force perpetrators to take accountability and face the dire consequences they deserve for the torture they have imposed.